So we will now look at a wide variety of galaxies that exist in our universe. A lot of it will be familiar to you, but feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions to ask. Okay. So we have seen that galaxies are the visible forms of the cosmic web. They are rarely isolated. They occur in groups and clusters of galaxies. They trace structures both in time and space. And when we look at galaxies at different redshifts, at different distances from us, they also give us a glimpse of the evolutionary history of the universe. And the properties of the galaxies that we see are closely related not only to their history of interactions with one another, but also related to the nuclear activity in them. They affect the overall global properties of the galaxies as well, and also of the surrounding medium. So these are often referred to as feedback processes. And so galaxies are a very important component of studying the universe, just as stars are, and give us very useful insights towards understanding the evolution of the universe as well. Okay. Now, we have looked at the Milky Way, and we have seen it's a beautiful spiral galaxy. And what are the different kinds of galaxies that exist in our universe is what we will try and have a look at it today. These are on the left is a computer simulation, and these are just visible forms of the cosmic wave galaxies, as we said. And galaxies, by and large, follow such structures when you plot them in position and velocity space. And this is, on the right is a gaseous filament where about a 2 million year light year cloud has been lit up by radiation from a quasar. The quasar is located about 10 billion light years away from us. So you can see all kinds of exotic phenomena happen in the universe when we look at different kinds of galaxies. Now, this was one of the early forms at classifying galaxies, okay? And this was done by Hubble, Edwin Hubble. He created a classification scheme, and it was entirely based on the way galaxies appeared in plates or films, or if you looked at it with the eye through a telescope. And he broadly classified them into the spirals and the ellipticals. And these ellipticals are ones which basically look elliptical when they're on the plane of the sky. So they could be like an egg, which is called a prodate, or they could be like a bun, which is an oblate, or they may have no axis of symmetry at all, in which case they're called triaxial ellipsoids. But basically they look elliptical in space. And he had a value E, which is E is equal to 1 minus B upon A, where B and A and B are the semi-major and the semi-minor axis. And depending upon higher the value, you can see that it is more elliptical. If B is equal to A, E would be equal to 0. So you'd get a sphere. And as the number increases, it becomes more elongated. Lenticulars, denoted as SO, have a central bulge and this kind of structure, but not quite prominent like the spiral structure that you see over here. And spirals, he split it up into two sort of chains. This is often referred to as a Hubble tuning fork diagram because of its shape. And there are differences in the way the arms are, as well as in the properties of the galaxies as you go from SA to SP to SC. And the difference between SA and SB ones with a capital B over here are that these are very prominent bars. Okay, these are pretty prominent bars, whereas these don't. Hubble was also wondering about how galaxies evolved, and he thought that these ellipticals may evolve into spirals. And the terminology of calling these as early type and these as late type has struck on from that kind of thinking, although we know that this is not the way they evolve. So when we talk of early type, we still talk of ellipticals. When we talk of late time galaxies, we still talk of spiral galaxies. So these were based on, again, images of nearby galaxies, bright, large, and beautiful. Okay, but we slowly began to realize that this is a very small fraction of the total number of galaxies. Okay, these are based on the major visible structural components, the disk and the bulge. Okay, and you can also see in many of these galaxies beautiful dust rings. Okay, these are, I think, on the right are HST images. These are sharper than ground-based images. Okay, and this is these are ellipticals. This is an SO where you can see some sign of a disk, and these are the spirals. These are the bar spirals. Okay, and but as I mentioned a little while ago, that there are many more galaxies than what Hubble classified. We mentioned while looking at our own Milky Way that the number of dwarfs outnumber the number of spirals and ellipticals in our own local group. So dwarfs outnumber the spirals and ellipticals that we're talking about now. So just to briefly get just an overview and very brief properties without even getting into profiles and shapes, etc. Most ellipticals, especially those in clusters, contain old stellar populations, all right? And they're thought to form by mergers of smaller galaxies or rapid collapse of non-rotating clouds. And merger scenario has been popular with some observational evidence that spirals can merge to form elliptical galaxies. In fact, when the Andromeda and the Milky Way are galaxy merge, we'll probably be left with an elliptical galaxy. Spirals show evidence of recent star formation, and stellar population on the average are younger than those of ellipticals. You may sometimes also get ellipticals which look bluish, which may have acquired recent gas and star formation is taking place. So these are the overall broad global properties. You will find that in a spiral, if there's been no recent star formation, it may look reddish, but generally these are the overall global properties. Lenticulars, SOs, as I said, are disk-like galaxies, but without the presence of strong spiral arms and obvious gas and dust. And star formation is characteristic of spirals and other star-forming galaxies, often found in clusters of galaxies, but also in the field. There have been various suggestions as to where they originate. They could be from spirals due to environmental effects. There could be spirals in clusters of galaxies depleted of gas and they therefore may be evolving into SOs. So these are sort of suggestions. There have been some observational evidences, but it's possible that not one picture fits everything. So we'll have to sort of bear that in mind. But the kinds of galaxies which did not really fall into Hubble's classification scheme, but were done later, were the irregular galaxies and the dwarfs. So these are two examples which are shown over here. They're smallish. They're much smaller than our typical spiral galaxies. They're star forming, the star formation which is going on. That is why you see this bluish kind of structure. They lack distinct spiral structure. Star formation dominates the appearance. They have a large range of surface brightness. And among non-interacting galaxies, they're amongst the bluest. Okay, they've been classified into various subclasses as well. Dwarf irregulars have low metallicity. Now, just to summarize it in a table over here, your spirals and ellipticals and irregulars have disks of stars, gas, and dust containing spiral arms and attached to a central bulge. SA and SPA have the largest bulges. SB galaxies have central bars, the ones with a capital P over here. Ellipticals have neither disk nor arms. Stars are distributed evenly. Shape varies from near circular to oval. When he says football, it's an American football. Okay, have no definite structure, irregulars. Spirals are both young and old stars. Halo stars consisting largely of old stars. Ellipticals largely of old stars. Irregulars contain both young and old stars. Spirals contain dust and gas. Halos contain little dust or gas, as we saw in our own Milky Way. Ellipticals contain little or no gas or dust, whereas irregulars have a lot of gas and dust. Star formation, largely in spiral arms. Ellipticals have little or no star formation. Irregulars generally have lots of star formation. Stellar motion, gas and stars rotate around the center of the galaxy. The bulge stars have random motions, as we saw in our own galaxy. And in elliptical, stars move on randomly oriented orbits like a swarm of bees over here. And in irregulars too, stars and gas have irregular orbits. So these are sort of the three main categories. But in addition to that, we have these dwarf ellipticals. These are the most common type of galaxies in the nearby universe. As we saw in our own galaxy, usually located in dense environments, resemble ellipticals but differ in light profiles, and they're much less luminous. But they span a reasonably large range. The absolute magnitudes are given here. Origins, one is not very clear, but the different scenarios which have been suggested, and it's possible that different scenarios may be applicable to different dwarfs as well. Some could be primordial from the initial density fluctuations. Some could have evolved from stripped galaxies of gas as they interact in groups and clusters of galaxies. And there's also evidence from some which have been studied in some detail that they're also embedded in dark matter. Then we have a class of galaxies, which again—
What do you mean embedded in dark matter? Do you mean they have dark matter, or do you think
they have dark
matter? They have dark matter? Okay.
They have dark matter. So dark matter surrounds them. Okay. So just like our galaxy is embedded in a dark matter halo, so these dwarf galaxies, at least some of them which have been studied, also seem to have dark matter, right? And the low surface brightness galaxies are just galaxies of extremely low surface brightness. Come in many shapes and sizes, but of extremely low surface brightness, greater than 24 magnitude per arc second squared. We saw that, and while defining the sizes of galaxies, we went to 25 magnitudes per arc second squared. Holmberg went a little bit deeper, and they're found in relative isolation, these low surface brightness galaxies. So they have had few, if any, major mergers or interaction events. They're believed to be formed mostly due to collapse of gas with gradual and continual ongoing star formation, but clearly not at a very high rate. And they're extremely diffuse and often difficult to pick up, and you need pretty deep images to pick up. So here are some diffuse, sort of, you can make them out from deep plates, okay, in the field of the galaxy M101. Now, besides these classes of galaxies, you also have, as we keep mentioning, that galaxies are interacting and merging all the time. In clusters of galaxies, there are far more interactions. In the intercluster medium can strip gas from a galaxy. Besides these interactions amongst galaxies themselves, due to ram pressure to intercluster medium, they could harass one another, tidally sort of tear things apart. So it's not only sort of, it's a very violent and a very active place as well. So, and in these interactions and mergers have profound effect on the evolution of galaxies. They affect star formation, they fuel nuclear activity. And what we see today is in the nearby universe is a history of the evolution of galaxies, where they may have undergone, interactions and mergers throughout the history since they initially formed in the early stages of the evolution of the universe. Besides Hubble's classification scheme, there have been other classification schemes as well, or expansions of it. This is referred to as a Hubble-de classification scheme. And there was an extensive catalog of called a third reference catalog of bright galaxies, which are relatively nearby galaxies again, compiled by de Vaucouleurs in 1991. And he actually assigned numbers to galaxies, and he also had, intermediate ones, which were intermediate in appearance, and also he had these highly regular galaxies, IM, in his classifications. Okay, so in his numerical assignments, he had the -6 to -4 are ellipticals, which we call the early types. -3 to -1 are the lenticulars, and 0 to 9 were the various types of spirals. Okay, these are the barred spirals, intermediate spirals, and the sort of regular spirals over here. So he had this slightly more complicated scheme than what Hubble had, incorporating the different types, but he also assigned numbers to them. So numbers were useful in terms of if you're trying to look at global properties, and at these numbers, you could sort of correlate them with these numerical classifications. Now, if you look at the entire population of galaxies, so say let's look at a nearby universe to start with. How many are ellipticals, how many are spirals, what kind of masses do they have? Okay. Now, this is a study which is based, I've just taken one, there are a lot of studies, there'll be more recent studies, but just to give you an idea, this is a study of galaxies from the third reference catalog of bright galaxies. Today, there have been much more extensive studies done from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, and one can look at evolutions of properties of galaxies themselves because they go to much fainter, more distant galaxies. But these are galaxies within relatively nearby. So you can see it as radial velocities are less than 15,000 kilometers per second. Okay. So if you divide it by C, you'll get Z, and you can see it's a very small number. So this has a sample of about 22,000 galaxies. And you can see that the absolute magnitude over here is plotted against distance. Okay, and the distance, just to show you where they lie. And one must note that when you go to further and further distances, okay, further and further distances, you have a natural selection effect that you will not see the less luminous galaxies, right? Because they would be below your flux density limit. So the line which you see over here, the cutoff kind of thing at the lower end, it is not a real cutoff at all. It is because you have defined an apparent magnitude limit to which you're selecting a sample. These kinds of biases will come into any plot that you make in astronomy, and one has to be aware of that. It is referred to as Malmquist bias in different circumstances, but there would be galaxies at this magnitude, even at high velocities or high redshift or more distant objects or more distant parts of the universe, but you have not been able to select them in this catalog because you have put a brightness limit over here. Okay. Now, you remember the t-type, this is the t-type which has been plotted over here, -5 to 10. So what does this show you? That about t of the order of 4, okay, which is over here, they seem to be the most common ones. Okay, SBC. -5 are the ellipticals over here. Okay, then around here are the SOs, then over here the spirals. So in this nearby universe, that 75% of them are spirals, 22% are ellipticals, and 2% are irregulars. Okay, it is also given the stellar masses. It is also given the colors B minus V, and you know that ellipticals will be redder in color. We'll see that in a short while because they consist of old stars, whereas spirals, which consist of young stars, will be bluer than the elliptical. I keep losing my cursor here. Now, this has been the same sample which has been plotted in a color diagram. Okay. Now, what you see over here is U minus B, which has been plotted against the absolute magnitude. Okay. Absolute magnitude over here. So what you see over here are the early type galaxies. Why early type? You can see U minus B is positive over here, right? Positive means that U has a larger value. U has a larger value means that it is fainter. That means it is brighter at longer wavelengths, right? Brighter at longer wavelengths means that they are ellipticals. Brighter at shorter wavelengths means that new stars are forming, hot young stars are forming, and therefore they are bluer in color. And so you have 0 or negative values, right? So you can see that early types are on the red sequence, late types are in the blue sequence, and mid types are somewhere in between over here, which is often referred to as a green valley. So these are terminologies which are used to understand the sort of evolution of galaxies themselves in terms of the regions they occupy. Now, for the same sample of galaxies, if I plot the stellar mass, okay, you see that when I come to the more massive galaxies, just note that in this particular plot, the paper I've taken it from is Gonzalez et al. 2006, is that the mass is increasing from right to left, okay? And this is the fraction of galaxies in different masses at different values of stellar mass. So if you come to the most massive galaxies, close to 10 to the power of 12, they're almost entirely ellipticals. Ellipticals dominate. Spirals have gone down. There are few regulars. As you go to lower masses, about 10 to the power of 10, say, okay, our galaxy spiral, our galaxy is about 10 to the power of 11, right? So somewhere over here, but in the region, it speaks around 10 to the power of 10 solar masses. So when you come to about 10 to the power of 10 solar masses, the ellipticals go down, the spirals dominate. And when you go to the lowest masses, you find that the irregulars dominate, okay? So just remember that the ellipticals are the most massive of the galaxies, okay? This actually shows you the same type, that the early type, this is why I said that the Euclid's numbering becomes useful. So -5 will straight away tell you that these are the ellipticals, which are redder in color. It's the same thing which is in plotted, B minus V. So B is large means it is peaking, it is fainter in blue, so it is peaking somewhere in the visual range, whereas as you go to smaller and smaller values, it is peaking at smaller wavelengths. Okay. Now, this plot shows you that the luminosity is increasing this way, the radius is increasing this way. It's just that the most luminous galaxies are the largest. So this is what it is observationally telling you, that the radius increases for the most luminous galaxies. These are just properties of the galaxies themselves. Instead of de Broglie number, this particular figure from this Bilkeel's course, this is quite a nice page to look, nice course to look for in terms of galaxies. Again, you can see ellipticals are reddish in color, and larger values of B minus V. And there's a systematic variation when you go from SOs to different types of spiral galaxies. We will not look into detail of the variations for different kinds of spirals, but just to be aware that the different kinds of spirals also show variations in colors. What I showed you earlier is what is plotted over here from much larger samples of galaxies as a contour diagram. This is what is referred to as a red sequence, which are the elliptical galaxies, early type galaxies. This is the blue cloud is referred to, which are the late type galaxies. Early types ellipticals, late type spirals. In the middle, you have a mixture of objects, which is often referred to as the green valley. Now, when you look at the masses, you cannot say it for one individual galaxy, but you can see that when you look at the masses of galaxies, that the ellipticals, the early types, tend to have larger masses than the late type. Here you can see the peak is slightly higher than 9.5, okay? And over here, it is, it's close to about 10.5 or so, right? It's close to about 11, the peak over here. Okay? So you can see that the early type galaxies are more massive. So the idea that spirals coalesce to form ellipticals is also consistent with the possibility that the early types have higher masses than the late type galaxies. Okay. So with this information, let me just sort of tell you, in terms of evolution, this is what this paper was trying to promote. And since I've taken the figures from him, I've just shown this, but this sort of gives you a broad picture kind of thing, that when it comes to mass, you have the dwarf ellipticals, the SOs and the ellipticals, they increase in mass this way, okay? And star formation increases this way, that when you have ellipticals generally or SODs, they have low star formation. When you have mergers or spirals, there's increased star formation. When there is mergers taking place or these irregulars, there is high star formation as well. And when interactions are more in galaxies which have merger-induced star formation. This is just an illustration, a schematic illustration of what we have been sort of repeatedly discussing or talking about. Two other aspects I want you to highlight about galaxy classification is that so far we have done all our classification from the optical images of galaxies. But when we look at the infrared universe now, that you see that, for example, these are near infrared galaxy morphology which has been put together. And there have been more such sort of collages compiled, but they don't look as striking or as stunning as others. Okay? So one has to keep in mind that galaxies look different at different wavelengths. Okay? And that you've also learned earlier while we were talking about different kinds of galaxies. Excuse me. And this is the Spitzer Infrared Nearby Galaxy Survey, which is one of the very well-known surveys in the near infrared region which we put together. I put some references over here so that you can look at it in more detail later. Here, actually, we don't see in the infrared, but what they have false colored it from observations at different wavelengths in the infrared region. So 3.6 microns is a shorter wavelength, 8.0 is the longer, and 24 is the oldest, okay? And so in addition to stars, these also trace gas clouds near young stars. So anyway, you can read a lot more about it, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. Okay. This is just an illustration again, which we met earlier. I'm just repeating it to show the galaxy M81, how it can look quite different in the visible and the ultraviolet. And this is in the X-ray region of the spectrum. And these are infrared images at different wavelengths. Okay. Now one can also ask oneself, what about a high redshift universe? Our galaxies look the same. There are evidences of spirals and ellipticals in high redshift universe, but interactions appear to have been far more common. So you'll often get in high redshift galaxies, in high redshift universe and high redshift galaxies, therefore, very disturbed structures. In fact, there have been attempts at classification, but nothing which is widely accepted. But you can see that because of the interactions which were taking place much more between galaxies, when they were much younger, that you can get all kinds of interesting shapes. Although there are spirals and elliptical shapes, it can also be discerned. And also in radio galaxies, for example, these are high redshift radio galaxies. The jets which squirt out from the nucleus, which you're all familiar with, that they can affect observed structures as well, which you see. And they could trigger star formation in the clouds, giving rise to a variety of shapes. In the interstellar medium of the galaxy, they could compress and trigger star formation. And so one should realize that Hubble's classification is something which Hubble did by looking at a very nearby universe, and that to large galaxies, which could be imaged and which look grand, which look fantastic. And those are very early attempts. But as we saw today, that the universe is far more complex, is far more rich, and it is populated in numbers, in much larger quantities by the small galaxies, the dwarfs. And this is very important in terms of trying to understand galaxy formation per se, because these dwarfs, if they are primeval galaxies, we formed at periods when structures form, we need to understand how that has happened, and also how galaxies have grown by, as we saw, cannibalizing these dwarfs, besides interacting with companions, merging, swallowing up companions, and in clusters sitting at the bottom of potential wells. So this is an image of the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, and nearly 10,000 galaxies. You can see galaxies of various ages, shapes, size, and colors. The smallest and the reddest, about 100 among the most distant existing in the universe, when the universe was just about 800 million years old. The nearer galaxies are the larger, brighter, well-defined spirals and ellipticals. They took this in a region of the sky where there was no bright stars so that you could see deep into the sky. But in this small region, there are about 10,000 galaxies or so. So galaxies are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. Today, we have had a look at the Milky Way and just an introduction to the different kinds of galaxies, just to introduce you to the field.